Morning, Kurt. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on the Life After Business show. Why don't you just give us a little bit of a rundown of the business that you had in the past?
Sure. So it was what would commonly be probably classified as a management consulting business with a kind of a special niche or emphasis in sales management and leadership. So we'd go into pretty significantly sized sales organizations and really help them with the change process that we believed was ultimately a human process. And a lot of times in the sales organization, they're pivoting based on something the C level has decided strategically they're going to go after. And really, the sales organization is there to carry out what that looks like at customer interface. And a lot of times that requires behavior change, and there are so many pieces and parts that help, I guess, collapse the time frame to that behavior change happening, be it a change in the sales process, how you compensate people, how you structure that part of the organization, how you lead, manage, and hold people accountable to the new behaviors. Certainly how you incent something different. Training gets involved. So what do we need to learn new and differently to pull this off? Technology, what tools, resources, etc., whether it's to help us keep track of what we're doing or help us do what we're doing better or help us communicate what value we're bringing to the client. There's so many tools out there now. So getting those tailored and all pointing towards what needs to happen at customer interface, those are the types of things that we got involved in. So on the surface, it's probably sales management, development, and leadership. But when you get into the details, there was a lot to it. So we'd go in and we'd try and help that organization shorten their time frame to pulling off whatever strategic initiative it is that they were charged with doing.
I love it. So, what was the first time that you thought it was your destiny to be an entrepreneur?
I'd have to go back to, so I started my career in sales. I went to school for finance, thought I'd be a broker, and real quickly figured out that it was going to be difficult to get middle-aged folks to part with their money and give it to a 24-year-old kid to manage for them. So once I realized that was going to be an uphill battle, I got into sales, and I had a background in the area that I went into. So pretty quickly, I was able to get into the shoes of the customers I was working with, and that was really my first foray into, I guess, what's considered consultative selling. I just didn't know I was doing it at the time, and I really enjoyed getting in, and most of my clients were smaller in nature, and I was in the restaurant business. Those were my clients, so I kind of saw firsthand, the passion, the energy, the work ethic, the just the kind of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into building a business, and that just intrigued me. While I was in that role, though, I was on the other side of the fence. I was working for a large company. I was one of many people out there in the marketplace, and one of many divisions in one of many countries that this company existed in. So I was just a small part of it, and it kind of felt like that. So I think that's kind of when the seed was planted. And then, from there, it was kind of paths crossed. I got involved in sales management while I was out there and really saw firsthand the issue that this little company that I became a part of was out there to solve. And happened to be that my father founded the consulting company that I was a part of for most of my career. And so when they got to a point that they were ready to grow, it kind of coincided with my timeline to where I was very interested in being an entrepreneur and helping be a part of growing a small company. And it happened to be in an area of expertise that I was quickly developing. So it all just kind of worked out. And I think those things came together. And
Walk me through the conversation you had with your dad as the ideas started flowing.
Yeah, I think it started, Ryan, with as I was coming back on a fairly regular basis to see family and friends on holidays. So when I took this job in the corporate world, I was out on the East Coast. So I would come back frequently to the Minneapolis area where my family's from and where this little consulting practice was started. And I'd just share with my father, what was going on and what I was challenged with and what we're trying to do in the company. And, we just started talking about, wow, I think a lot of what I was sharing with him validated what he believed was needed out there in the marketplace. Not that he needed my validation, but it just kind of proved that, if these sorts of issues and challenges at the sales management level were happening in a company the size I was with, then certainly there was a market to be had. And so as we're going back and forth, it just kind of morphed into a conversation where I was like, man, I'd really like to be a part of what you're doing. I believe in it. I'm living the issue over here. I think I can help grow the practice. I can bring a lot of ideas and expertise to the practice that kind of complemented what he was doing. So I just, it just kind of started that way.
How did you guys have the conversation about ownership?
Oh, we never had that early on. So early on was all about being a part of the organization, just as really an employee and a contributor and a producer. Fully knowing that, I had to learn quite a bit about the consulting world. In our points of view and models and the different things and the type of work we do at clients. So the getting involved in ownership really didn't happen until I'd say probably about 9 years in of a 16-year time period that I was there.
So what was the revenue when you started, and then when that conversation took place?
Yeah, so when I started, which was was in 1999, it was 6 years into the business. The revenue, it's been a long time, but I'd say it's probably right around $1 million. It was a small practice that was growing pretty steadily, but cautiously year over year. When we got into the ownership conversation, that was kind of the 2008 time frame, and revenue at that point when we did valuations, the business was in the 2.5 to 3 million range.
So when you just mentioned valuation, which is a key piece to a lot of the listeners, what was the whole process that you went through in order to get that valuation, and what was the purpose behind it?
Really, we had a gentleman who worked, a resource for us that we used for a lot of different things, who did that process for us. So he kind of ran that, and that was one of my learnings looking back, is that maybe should have used multiple resources to do the valuation. But we went with that, and that a little bit of my naivete there. But we had that person in place, and he applied a valuation process to it, and that's how we came up with the number.
And then the goal of using that valuation was to help with the agreement or the buy-in with your dad?
Yeah, that was to set the kind of the benchmark, so to speak. So with a valuation where it was, that allowed us now to go put together a plan around, okay, how would we finance this and do the rest of the piece? And so when we did the ownership conversation, my father wasn't ready to be totally out of the business yet. We were looking at probably about a 5-year window.
Okay.
And so what we did is we did two different transactions. One was for a kind of smaller portion of the ownership or equity in the business, and then that would take place over a period of, I believe we did 3 full years, and then year 4 we set up a second transaction, which would be the option to buy in at that point for the rest of it, and that would have in essence allowed him to be fully out of the business at that point.
So how did the new actual locked-in financial partnership of your dad explain the dynamics that you guys had, and did it change from before and after, or what was that like?
Yeah, I think it did. I think more so though, what happened was kind of the whole financial and business environment changed right soon after we did this deal. So we were experiencing some pretty good growth at that point. And the assumption in our heads was that we would just continue on that path. And if we continued on that path, by and large, that would mostly fund the transition. Now, what changed was
The whole world blew up.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how you'd even describe it, but we
Did you find it, was it harder to get customers and stuff? Because I mean, with consulting, I don't know what your experience is. Was it more difficult, or did you have locked in contracts with your customers?
it changed dramatically. No, everything we did was project based, which certainly made it more difficult. But we always had an extremely strong return on investment. So that kept us solid in that we could defend the investment. So we always tried to distance ourselves, at least in front of clients, from the consulting world because I guess
There's a lot of negative connotations to
yeah,
it.
the stereotype is, here's a plan. We're going to give you a binder. Good luck with implementation. And we were always very tried to take the opposite approach. Was a lot of times we'd even come in after one of the more well-known consulting practices had been in place and had done exactly that. We'd take whatever they built or offered and actually get it put into place. So we were really about execution. So that stood strong during that time. Problem was, what changed was how companies bought. So a lot of times we would be, like any business, working through budget season and planning, and they knew what they wanted to get done in the upcoming year. And you're able to orchestrate and organize that pretty clearly and pretty planfully. Well, and they'd be able to set aside the budget and on you to go. Well, the budget process really changed from people looking at things annually to almost monthly and quarterly. So they never knew month to month whether A, the money would be there to spend, or B, whether they'd be able to spend it if it was there, or C, just whether they could still pursue whatever strategy it was, because a lot of companies were changing those things even on the fly.
So when you were doing your projects, how did the billing structure go for that? Was it an all up front, or was it in installments, or after the job was complete?
We would do a third, a third, a third. So anytime we did a project, it was a third on signature of the contract. We'd pick a milestone, usually right around halfway through the project, or what we anticipated the project to be, and do a third there and then a third at completion. So we always had very specific deliverables and timelines that we were working on that we'd use to kind of build that out. And those became at risk, by the way. So
The last third?
the second third and the third were always at risk during that period.
I was going to say, so given the economy, the new buying process, and the ambiguity and the confidence of the cash flow, I mean, what was the dialogue in your head as you now have a large stake or a major skin in the game?
Bordering on frustration / panic, I would say, are the words. What stopped very suddenly was the ability to open up new doors. Just because companies were afraid to go down, to your point, any of those roads at that point, whether it was marketing, any sort of what was viewed as ancillary spending, that opening up new doors and relationships and getting people to bite off on that bullet and go that route was very difficult because they were scared. They weren't going to take chances. They weren't going to take risks. People were worried about their jobs, and all that filtered down into our world. So, we were largely living on referrals and existing business in those relationships because we had that established track record.
How was the concentration or the ratio of your clients? Did you have any one specific staple client that kind of dragged everything through and made everything viable, or was it fairly diverse?
No, we had some what I would call flagship clients. There's no question. In matter of fact, right during that. Yeah, it was interesting. We had a couple of major organizations, household names that you'd recognize that were clients that did pull us through. But also because we were so concentrated on that, lost focus on what we had to do to bring in new companies and new clients. And, given that it was, I guess, an all hands on deck type atmosphere, we're doing what we could to make sure that we stayed strong and viable and continued to deliver good work. but it was still just a few of us.
So you're probably a couple years into your equity buy-in, and then you said that there was 6 years from that your conversation till when you sold. What was the next step? Because you said there was going to be a second stage of your buy-in, and then obviously we're coming up on the time frames to when you sold. Then was there a triggering event in between, and so did that second piece go through, or kind of walk us through that timeline?
Sure. I think, the way to describe what happened was, so we came once kind of things softened a little bit, 2010, 2011. We were actively as a partnership team. There was three of us in total. Really what it evolved over the years was three people starting to do three different things to try and build and grow the business. A lot of that was done out of necessity, and that our clients were spread all over the country, and so we were very rarely in the same room together. And the type of work we were doing with our clients started to vary. So what you started to see happen internally is, Kurt's doing this over here, and the other two partners are doing what they had to do with their clients over here. And, we could recognize that. We knew that. So one of the things we did, and this all circle back to your question, is, a lot of clients, at least in our area, are doing this EOS thing, right? And what I like about that program was it kind of centers you back on working on your business. And what was very critical and important to me, and I was pretty vocal about it, maybe to my detriment ultimately within the organization, was that I knew we needed to do something to leverage and take advantage of all the models and points of view and intellectual property we created over the years, because that's where the value really was going to lie in the long-term aspect of our business. And I just saw day after day after day go by where we weren't capitalizing on that. We were still recreating the wheels, so to speak. For every client, we leaned on custom quite a bit. And that was a differentiator that wasn't going to allow us to scale. And I knew if we didn't scale at some level and start to create revenue that was generated other than the partners in the business, that there would be no value in the business long term if people left it. So what I did was literally push hard to get some things in place that would get the conversation started around how do we focus the business, how do we start to look at and create a vivid vision for the future. What does that require that we do? Who needs to be in what roles in order to pull that off? Who's got the gifts that are needed to keep us on track and do the work on the business versus what we're doing in the business. And so we went down that path. And when we started going down that path, I was starting to feel pretty good about we could pull it off. But as it goes with a lot of small businesses, you get distracted with, servicing and delivering for the clients. And ultimately, that project failed. And when that failed, we took a hard look at why. And we took a run at building an advisory board because we thought maybe, getting a little bit more practical feedback and points of view on how to do what we're talking about would make some sense. So we got some people on our board with experience in doing that. And, they were giving us feedback that we're on the right track. This is the right thing to do. We started to organize the business in that fashion. And ultimately, that ended up not working. And it didn't work for, I think, a lot of different reasons. But while all that's going on, this final equity moment where our transaction, if you will, was coming up. And
so that's before. So you were doing all that before your second installment.
Right. By and large. I mean, some of the stuff was running kind of congruent, but I made the decision at that point and says, I'm not going to make that final purchase right now because financially it makes no sense for me to work to buy somebody out of the business and then have them go away and clients go away and basically have to rebuild the business.
What was the conversation you and your dad were having during this time?
Yeah, we probably should have conversed more about it. but I think both of us were frustrated that, the timing of some of these things happened the way it did. Some of it in our control, a lot of it not. Certainly, he extended his desire to work and need to work longer, so there were a lot of just different things that took place that kind of made it muddy, if you
Hmm.
will. And I don't think any of these things are clean and cut and dry. So I don't know that
You're
we're,
dealing with people.
yeah, yeah. And I think that, we should have probably conversed more about it, but the conversations were, I think, from my perspective, that I'm not interested and willing to buy something that isn't there.
What was the triggering event that made you guys decide to sell, or you decided to sell?
Yeah. So great question. So the triggering event. So if you go back to the beginning of 2015, which is when all this really started, we had brought in an advisory board summer of 2014, and we'd had a number of meetings. And at one of our very first meetings, obviously, we were charged with building a strategic plan for the future. So we sat down, we did that, we put together what we thought, Ryan, was a really good, solid plan. The board members that we had brought on validated that. They thought it was very solid, and we were working very productively to execute that plan, even to the point where we brought on an individual. So this was the start of bringing on folks who could create revenue other than us, which was a big part of our plan. We brought out an individual who was stationed out in San Francisco, which we thought was a potential market. We had some clients out there already. This individual showed some promise of maybe being able to build a market and use our intellectual property and different types of things to do that. So we were making progress on this plan. Right around, I would say, early February of 2015, kind of out of nowhere, the third partner in the business approached both of us for around a buyout and an offer to do so. So it was never anything that was planned. It was never anything that I triggered. I was at that point still I was actually, maybe looking back, probably the most positive I felt about the future of the business at that point. And I think my father was as well. He could kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. We were starting to do some things that I think were going to build the business for the future, which was what I was very interested in. And he, from a legacy standpoint, was very interested in. And we had a plan to do so, and we had some good advisors to help us do that. I was also involved in a executive peer group myself, which I'm heavily involved in now today, that was giving me great guidance, feedback, ideas, and validation on what we were doing too. So we all felt really good with that. We had a great plan. But then, in February of 2015, that plan was put on hold, and the offer was made by the third partner.
It's amazing how an unexpected offer like that will distract you, isn't it? Where you kind of just got your head down and you're running towards a plan, and now you've got an interesting option on the table, and now you have to internally reflect on what do we want. And it's that's for our listeners. That's actually there's a high percentage of the businesses that are sold where the unexpected offer comes from internal employees or a strategic buyer, local competitor, or some private equity company. And someone that's got a long-term plan immediately has to kind of look up and go, okay, intrinsically, what do I want?
Right. And I think that's probably what she was doing. And it forced the same for the rest of us, which, looking back, was the best thing. Glad it happened, and really forced me to think back. What do I really want, and how do I want to go about doing it? What am I most interested in being a part of, and who do I want to be around to do that with? And I think she was going through that same thinking. It was difficult there for a while. I don't know that any of us had extreme confidence in the others to pull it off. And I think that is a residue of, all the stuff we did and went through leading up to it.
So when you were sitting down and reflecting of what else you might want to be doing, what were some of the thoughts going through your head?
Yeah. So, timing's everything, right? Um, I mentioned I was part of this peer group network for about 5 years. Basically, from the time I bought into the organization to today, I sought out help because I knew quite a bit about what our domain was as a company and what we do in sales organizations. But I had a lot of ground to cover as it related to, financially, legally, operationally, the business model in my head I ultimately wanted to drive us towards. How do we go about doing that? Things like that. And so I sought out a group to help me do that. Well, I've always been of an orientation to help others and shorten their time frame to getting what they want out of their business for them, both personally and professionally. And, from day one, when I was working with restaurant owners in my first job, that's what I derive great pleasure out of and satisfaction. That's what made me go and tick every day. It wasn't about, anything other than that. And then when I got into the firm with my father and our other partner, what I loved about what we did was how we impacted people's lives every day, made their world easier, helped them be successful and be better at what they were trying to do, and always got great run out of that. It gave me great juice and energy every day to go do it again, whatever it took to make that happen. And then, when I sat back and said, what do I want for the future? I knew I wanted to be a part of something or do something that allowed that to continue to happen. And so I got great clarity around what I loved to do and what I wanted to do. And that process kind of crystallized that for me.
Interesting. So when you say timing is everything then, so what was some of the unique pieces of the puzzle that allowed this timing to be a significant value for you?
Sure. So, the group I'm a part of is called Allied Executives, and John Palin, who founded that group, was my peer group director for the years that I was involved as a member. So as I was going through this offer process and in negotiation and all that stuff, I was bringing it to my group to get their feedback, ideas, etc. And throughout that process, John and I had a number of conversations about just, what do you want? And as I was describing what I wanted, we had a relationship obviously built over a number of years and a trust there. But also, I think he heard what I was saying around what was of most interest to me, and that I was going to set out to find a way to do that. And it just kind of, I think, was an aha. I mean, he approached me and said, man, I'm really looking to build this business. I know there's a way to do it. I love what we do. And I get the feeling that it's right in alignment with what you're all about and what you want to do. Would you ever be interested in figuring out how we could do this together? And that's how it started. And as I sat back and said, geez, I don't know, kind of came out of left field, so to speak. As I thought about it deeply, it really checked all the boxes that I was thinking about and talking about. The opportunity to work with, 180 different executives, CEOs, owners, and leaders around the city, and kind of help them on their journey of where they want to go, and shorten their time frame of doing that, and not necessarily always doing it directly in a one-on-one basis, but helping pull together a whole set of guides or Yodas, if you will, that they can lean on to, at the end of the day, kind of get up and out of their business or out of the weeds of it, where we all get trapped from time to time, and, get good, honest feedback from someone you trust who, doesn't have a horse in the game, so to speak, but it's there to help you just kind of work through what you need to work through to make the right decisions. And help you be more effective as an owner and executive.
Which is almost like the advisory board that you wish you would have had while you had your business.
Well, I had it as I was a member. But I didn't have total control to make all of the decisions, obviously, but
There's
you
the
know,
entrepreneur in you.
yeah, right. So, but what I knew was, I love working with someone else and having a partner in the business. I think there's a lot of richness and that comes from that, and a lot of, when one of the things that John and I do now well today is I think we complement each other pretty well. And that's always been a goal of mine is to work with others to do and build something. But yeah, this environment, you know,
It's special, and
it's,
I'll do a little plug here.
well, it's countless ways, Ryan, that over the years, the 5 years that helped us, whether it was by, you know, certainly, we had a lot of good years in the business and did a lot of great things with a lot of great clients. And a lot of that came through some feedback and different ideas and resources that was pointed to, et cetera, through allied executives. So there's so many different ways it can add value. Sometimes it's a big idea. Sometimes it's, hey, I'm just trying to do, something like create a new website or something. Who should I talk to? As you well know. So,
Well, and I'm going to do a little bit of a plug for you here
oh,
too.
wow.
So for the listeners, my dad and I, when we had Imaging Path, we were part of Vistage. So I think a lot of people are very familiar with Vistage. Also, there's EO, which is Entrepreneurs Organization, and Allied is a very prestigious group here locally in the Twin Cities, and it's the same thing, and it's a fantastic environment because when we were in Vistage prior to selling, you're bouncing ideas off of because you're not alone. I mean, and being alone as an entrepreneur, I think is one of the, very common feeling because you feel like the buck stops there. And so the organization, Kurt, that you and John have is great, and you guys are growing and making it better every day. So it's a fantastic thing.
I appreciate that plug. And the one thing I'll say about it is all those organizations you mentioned are great. The whole model is great. It's all about finding the right fit for you. And they're all different in that regard. So, but one of the things, just having gone through that experience, and then having gone through the experience of being in a 3-person partnership team and the challenges of that, is being something, because it there everybody's got blind spots, or there's dark spots you can't see, and to have 10 to 12, 13 other men and women who are living in your shoes, are all the conversations to them are relevant as they are to you. They can help you, and they'll help you see stuff that you're not seeing. They'll help you. They'll kind of give you the feedback you need to hear.
Yep.
That others
Yep.
might not tell you. And I got plenty of that over the years. Um,
I'm sure John was very open with that.
yeah, you need that, because the hard part about being an entrepreneur or part of an entrepreneurial team in your company is, where do you go to get your ideas? You're expected to have all the answers within your own company. But
Speaking of answers, so if you were to go back and give your past self one
yep.
piece of advice when you were having that conversation about equity with your dad, what's the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Go get more valuations on the business. Bring in a second and third party to do that. So you're dealing with a set of information that kind of level sets everything and everybody. That would be a big one. I think the second one would be to really spend a lot more time, even with the third partner, saying, what do we really want out of the business? And what's the vision for this thing? And how are we going to make it happen? Because what I've learned after going through that, and what I've learned through listening and observing others who have done some acquisitions and things similar to what I did, or just buying another company, is at the end of the day, it's about the management team in place and the way you're going about building the business. We should have done more of that. And I should have forced those conversations first before buying and doing it on, I don't want to say blind faith, but on the assumption that we'll figure it out as we go.
I love it. So, Kurt, if there's a way, how can people get in touch with you today?
Sure, a couple ways. Email is easy. My email address is KTHERIAULT at alliedexecutives.com. Otherwise, I'm a still big believer in using the phone. So I'll even give out my phone number. It's 952-484-0166. That's my cell phone. And if anybody's got any questions or what have you, I'm happy to chat with them. So
I
those are
love
probably
it.
the two best ways. And then obviously our website too, www.alliedexecutives.com.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt.